Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to those of you who are still here to be here with the graveyard shift late on a Friday afternoon. I often wonder, actually, whether it's a blessing or a curse to be given the graveyard shift, but I have to say, actually, today I think it's an immense blessing and a privilege because I get to do two things. The first thing is I just get to say to all of you, what an absolute delight and a pleasure it's been hosting you all in Cape Town and South Africa this year. So thank you so much for joining us. Yes, you can applaud. Thank you. And secondly, I'd like to say it's also a great honor to be given the opportunity to actually moderate the last panel of the day because it brings together all of the threads that you've been hearing around the past 2 days and that are directly linked to the theme of our conference. So you've heard this a few times. The theme of the conference is License to Operate, the role of insurance in supporting societal resilience. This is something that's very close to the IAIS. It's something that forms one of the 3 strategic themes in the upcoming strategic plan. The theme highlights or underscores the important role of insurance in ensuring financial resilience, but what it also does is it highlights the importance or the important role that insurers and insurance supervisors can play towards broader societal goals beyond financial resilience. Over the past few days, you've heard discussions around the progress we've been making collectively towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the role that insurance can play. We've heard the calls growing stronger and stronger to find ways to address increasing protection gaps. And of course, you've heard about the importance of inclusivity and diversity to bring us together to make sure that as insurers and insurance supervisors, we are delivering better societal outcomes, better market outcomes, and better supervisory outcomes. I'm very happy that we've got a great panel of guests to help build on these themes and give us their unique insights as to how we can elevate the role of insurance and contribute towards bigger goals like sustainable economic growth, as well as support to vulnerable communities. And I will say that as an emerging market supervisor, this is obviously something that's very close to us, as responding to risks and issues that impact vulnerable communities is something that's very close to what we do. So I'm going to start with our virtual panelists. I'm very sorry that you can't join us in Cape Town, but I'm immensely grateful that you've given up your time to share some insights with us. On the line, we've got Carmine, the Director for Financial and Enterprise Affairs at the OECD. Good afternoon. Very happy to have you here.
Yeah, sorry not being there, but I'm happy to join.
Thank you. We've also got Delphine, the CEO for General Insurance at Sanlam Allianz. Welcome, Delphine. Very happy to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Cape Town.
Thank you. And closer to home, it's a pleasure to be joined by 2 people I know well. So firstly, my sister Grace, fellow and neighboring supervisor, the commissioner of the Zimbabwean Insurance and Pensions Commission. Very nice to have you with us. And of course, Izak, very well known in the South African market, but you're here wearing a global hat today, right? So you're here as the vice chair for the International Corporation and Mutual Insurance Federation. Welcome, great to have you here.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get straight into it. The way we're going to do this, I think we'll start by talking a little bit about the status quo. So what do we understand as the societal role of insurance today? And what are those areas that we think are working well, and what are those areas that perhaps need a lot more focus and attention? Before I get to my panelists, I think we've got a question for the audience for you to reflect on. Can we perhaps have the question up on the screen? I know everyone's used to using Slido now. So the first question, what challenges does the global insurance sector face in terms of delivering good societal outcomes? So while you're reflecting on that, I'll turn to you, Izak. Can you maybe give us your view in terms of the role that the sector has been playing in this respect, but maybe also tell us a little bit about some of those areas that you think we actually need to do a little more on?
Yes, thanks, Farzana, and good afternoon all. Yes, Farzana, first of all, what's the role? What's our big goal here? It's, of course, creating a safer and a more resilient world. Almost tempted to say a happier world. Hey? We built that bridge between a loss and recovering. So, yeah, good outcomes that the sector has achieved. You know, obviously there's paying the claims, yes, but what we can, there's so much more if we reflect. First of all, education. And it's not only at the bottom of the pyramid. The society that, my day job, the segment that we serve is the professional market. And I can tell you, even professionals, you know, very smart people in their professions, but sometimes lacking a bit when it comes to the world of personal finance, world of insurance, and that create insurance gaps. So very important roles that we as a sector can play in terms of education. And then good risk management. We all know that prevention is better than cure. And there's so much that the sector and companies do assisting people to manage their risks better. We can think in the life insurance space, on the health side, wellness side, short-term insurance, you know, driving behavior, and managing assets better, maintenance, those kind of things. Farzana, even today I got an email from my short-term insurance company, and here in South Africa we're about to head off on summer holidays, and reminding me of things like, you know, checking the tires and things like that. So just good proactive risk management. I think it's a very important role that the sector play there.
That's, as a supervisor, that's very encouraging to hear. So.
And then, of course, the world of microinsurance, Farzana. I mean, we know that, yes, microfinance is important to assist people to start businesses, but without the risk protection side of things, you know, if calamity visits, then it all can disappear. So on the microinsurance side, very good examples across the continent in Africa. I think really a country to also look, almost the home of microinsurance these days is the Philippines. Very, very good things that happens there. To your question of what can we do more, and of course, you know, this is a conference of insurance regulators, and wearing my ICMA hat, I would argue there is, as far as mutuals and cooperative insurers are concerned, you know, there's much more to do. It's a model that has been in existence for centuries. In fact, it's almost the original model. I would argue it's almost the natural model, but of course, yeah, and there was a time in history when most insurance organizations were in fact mutuals. But we know over the course of history that has changed. Many has demutualized. Sometimes maybe not often, always for the right reasons. Perhaps, you know, short-term gain was tempting, but nevertheless, today about a quarter of insurance premiums across the world, a quarter of all insurance premiums, more or less $1.5 trillion US, is still paid to mutuals. I think there's a lot more that the regulators across the world can do in that respect. And very happy to see that the United Nations has recently declared 2025 to be the year of cooperatives, of mutuals, in really encouraging that model, because it is a model that can serve society very well. I would say there's three very important things that almost differentiates mutuals from other organizations. First of all, the full focus on their members. Farzana, can one be a bit controversial on a Friday afternoon? I would argue that if all organizations were mutuals, there would not be that much for regulators to do.
Okay, so maybe I'll stop you there. Right. Let's not air our dirty laundry.
But yeah, on the mutual and cooperative side, there's a bit of work to do, I believe.
No, thank you very much. So, you know, what I appreciated is how you started your response. As an insurer, you would normally start with risk management, and you started with education, and I think that's a very important point. I think that we probably need to build on. Moving to Carmine now, Every year we hear the calls getting stronger that we need to address protection gaps. We normally talk about it. The IAIS has done work around NatCat protection gaps, but we heard even in the earlier panel that protection gaps is hitting a number of areas, whether it's health, whether it's cyber. But coming back to climate specifically, we know that this is an area, and in fact, I think any insurance protection gap, it's not a problem that can be solved just by insurers. It's not a problem that can be solved just by government or regulators. It's an area that requires collective action. From your experience and perspective, can you maybe talk to us around the role that you see of international cooperation and maybe public-private partnerships to help address this very important and pressing need?
Thank you, Farzana. And first of all, also let me thank again IAIS for the invitation, the chair Shigeru Arizumi, and also we often cooperate very well together, also recently at G7, so very happy to be here, though only virtually. And by the way, for maybe a next panel, I would like to discuss a lot on cooperatives, which I think is a great topic. And no, let me say, maybe before directly answering the question, just a preliminary point. I have to say, despite problems, there have been some progress in closing protection gaps when you look at the insured share of economic losses at the share of total GDP. And for instance, these are recent numbers that I guess many of you know. In the last 5 years, for example, 2019-23, approximately 50% of natural hazard losses were uninsured. A lot, but actually an improvement relative to about basically 10 point more, 66% between 2000 and 2004. Now, however, I mean, I agree certainly overall that the protection gap is still, large for many, perils in many countries, and particularly with emerging markets. And obviously, this is also endogenous because the situation is not obviously static, and unfortunately for climate change, because this is posing a significant risk to the progress that have been achieved, in terms already of closing protection gaps, and so could exacerbate existing gaps. Now, in many OECD countries, we are seeing a stress in insurance markets that are leading to some also withdrawals of coverage, and so these increases in premiums that are all challenging to the boundaries of affordability. And this is compounded also by the effects of inflation, obviously, that are driving up the cost of rebuilding. And also, again, just some numbers, because I think they're always useful. In the US, increasing natural hazard losses and other factors have meant that the average household spent 30% more of their income on home insurance than they did in 2001. And in Australia, actually, the report that was released recently at the end of August found that 15% of Australian households could be considered affordability stressed in terms of their ability to pay for home insurance coverage. And this is up from 12% in 2022-2023. And also in Canada, France, and UK, other big countries, OECD countries, there are reports that some banks are refusing actually to provide mortgages in areas facing high current or even future flood risk. So there is an increasing interest. You were mentioning also how to do. We need some obviously cooperation. First of all, I hear a lot of background noise, but I don't know if also you hear, but maybe okay, now it's muted, I hope. And so there is increasing interest in public-private partnership or catastrophe risk insurance programs in place, basically that can be useful not only in OECD countries and beyond as a means to address protection gaps. Actually, for our crowd in 2017, there were 10 OECD countries that had catastrophe risk insurance programs for the covered flood, and today there are 14 countries, 40%, that have programs in place or that have announced their intention to create one. And actually this year, as especially in that house, the G7 the Group of Seven under the Italian G7 presidency, so developed this high-level framework for public-private insurance programs against the natural hazard with IAIS and OECD contributions. Now, this is not only the only solution, PPPs. There are several actions that can be taken in advance, which also, require a close collaboration between governments and industry. Would it be improving, risk awareness and financial literacy? I think this topic in general of education is really an important one. Incentivizing, obviously, risk reduction.
Sorry, we lost you there for a minute, but
yeah.
I see you're back.
Okay. Yeah, okay, also I heard some music. Now, I was saying that the important things beyond the PPPs, I don't know if you were there, were improving risk awareness and financial literacy, which I think it's an important issue, incentivizing risk reduction and addressing barriers. And then there is cooperation. And this is crucial to support, the sharing of experiences and lessons on how to address protection gaps. For its part, the OECD has, over the years provided an international platform for convening, key stakeholders and promoting, knowledge sharing on disaster risk insurance, and, has developed a large body of work in this area, including on PPPs. And again, even sharing today, having, the event together, collaborating and sharing, between regulators, supervisors, and market operators, I think is essential. I get you back.
Carmine, I think we'll leave it there because I think you've raised a few issues that we probably will need to build on in terms of future, what we need to do in order to make sure we look towards the future as well. I think the case studies that you've provided are also extremely helpful. Coming back to Grace, I think before I get to your question, maybe if we can go back to the results from the poll. So we'd asked the question around what are some of the challenges the insurance sector faces in terms of delivering good societal outcomes? I don't see the poll results. Here we go. All right, so we've got a pretty clear winner. The greatest challenge, developing products that meet evolving consumer needs. Grace, to what extent do you agree with this? So from your perspective, what do you think are the greatest challenges preventing the sector from, we know the sector's done well to help support economic resilience, but in terms of broader societal goals, what do you think are some of the challenges we need to meet?
Thank you very much. So I think my answer is there. It's really cast out for me, and I totally agree with that. So I'm a regulator. And I think listening into the conversations over the last 2 days, we are very clear about the risks. We are all very clear. We are aware that the risk landscape is changing, but let's look at the products. Our traditional products are not speaking. Yeah, they're not speaking to the current risks. I think it's very clear. And in fact, I was having a conversation with my team a couple of weeks ago, and someone said, why is it that when Apple releases a product, we start buying the product before it's even released? Why is it that our market cannot come up with products that our consumers will seek out? I think we are all aware that insurance indeed is a protection gap closing measure. But how many of our consumers actually embrace insurance as a protection gap closing measure? And I think part of it, Fazab, is that we are not innovative enough. We have not been able to create products and design products that are actually speaking, to the current risks. And perhaps we need to spend more time doing this. And just looking at that slide, I'm aligned with that we need to be a lot more creative, innovative in our product design. I was listening to CEOs. They did talk to the challenges of design, perhaps skills. And I know, speaking for Sub-Saharan Africa, which is the jurisdiction that I belong to, actuarial skills are not only scarce, but they are also very expensive. But I think given where we are, if we are serious about wanting to close the protection gap, I think this is an investment that we need to start making. But in addition to that, Fazal, I also want to speak to awareness. We recently conducted a FinScope survey. And I think top of the list was actually awareness in financial literacy. So yes, I think the design of products is top of the list there. I also think that consumer awareness is really high up there. We need the consumers to embrace insurance. Yeah, and there's a lot of work that we need to do. I know a lot of our jurisdictions have got financial inclusion strategies, plans, and we are all working towards that. But I think it's pointing to a lot more work that we need to do, maybe targeted financial literacy to really make sure that our consumers embrace insurance, as a protection gap closing measure. Maybe, can I, lastly, just to add, I didn't see that, on the Slido, but I want to add the issue of trust and confidence in the sector, because I really think this is important. We are an industry which is based on utmost good faith. So this is supposed to be an industry for ladies and gentlemen, but whether real or perceived, we have trust issues. And I also think that we are an industry which should just deliver on its promise. This is something that we really need to work on so that we regain trust and confidence. And I think it probably could be one of the reasons why it's stopping us from fulfilling, our role, as a protection gap closing measure. In addition to the others, I know I can add on and on and on, but I think for now, let me submit on this. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think we can have this discussion for a long time. I think what's encouraging is there's a theme that's coming through very strongly already, between Izak, Carmine, and yourself, which is around education and literacy and what you were saying. You actually can't have inclusion without empowerment, and I think it's the awareness and the understanding that leads to empowerment. But going back to the innovation and the product design, as I said earlier, particularly for us as EMDs, it's about serving vulnerable communities, and the question we always get asked is, well, can you actually close that gap if you keep doing the same things over and over? Innovation is quite important. But Delphine, perhaps you've got a perspective on this around, well, what are these barriers that are stopping us from being able to innovate, perhaps, and rise to these challenges from a sector perspective?
Thank you. And first, I'd like to thank the IAIS for the invitation through the chairman and through the Secretary General. It's an honor to be here. I wish I was there with you. But happy to be in line and happy to see Grace on the platform there, who is one of our regulators. Maybe I should start with the product topic, right? And then maybe take it one level higher. One of the key challenges, at least from the insurance sector, and I'm glad that we are here with the supervisors, is the regulation that we have to manage as insurers, right? We need to protect the consumer. We need to make sure that the insurers are there to pay the claims when they need to do it. This is why also our regulators are there to make sure that they are helping us build trust in the governance that they have. But we also have to remember that the complex environment across the world, I've worked in the US, I've worked in Canada, I've now in Africa across 27 countries. When we look at product in particular, to be able to get a product approved in the US, you have to go through every single regulator in all states. The same happens when you're in Canada. All 13 provinces need to approve your product. When you come to our continent here in Africa, it's the same thing. And then you look around companies that are Pan-African in nature, where we have customers that are global customers doing business in Africa, and they have to also navigate the complex regulatory environment that we have on the continent. And I think one of the key plea that we tend to have as insurers is that there needs to be a bit more closer alignment with the regulators. And I'm happy with the work that the IAIS is doing, because this is essentially one of the key points, is that regulators learn from each other so that the complexity also gets a bit lighter across. I'll give you an example. We closed a transaction merging entities across 27 countries. We had to go to 87 regulators. It took us 18 months to get it signed off. So if we have to, as insurers, work on making sure that we are providing a product to support the societal change, then it's also important for the regulators to work closely together. The other challenge that we have is competition, where price wars are not easy. And then on top of that, we have insurtech coming into the picture that are not necessarily managed, at least at the same level of regulation when it comes to solvency requirement, capital requirement, as we are in the traditional insurance sector. So there's a need for us to work closely with the insurtech companies, because the good thing that they do is innovation. There's a lot of flexibility that they have in innovation, but there needs to be a little bit of a balance as far as what regulation applies to insurtech, to insurance companies, and how do we do this together. Technical adaptation, as I come through it, is also key, right? And I'm glad that this is part of the key strategic priorities of the IAIS. Without the flexibility to innovate, this also becomes an issue. I'll give you a few examples, and I like to give examples because we are in the day-to-day of this as insurance companies. In some parts, I'll take the case of West Africa, for example. Even though we have a common regulator, the insurance certificate in one country does not apply in another. Some countries across sub-Saharan Africa still do not have approval for electronic certificates, but yet we talk about technological adaptation. So I think there's some work that as an industry, together with our supervisors, we need to work on. So I'll stop here. I can go on for the next 20 minutes on the challenges, but what the point that I would like to make is that as an insurance sector, if we really want to have the continuous change into the overall societal impact, it's going to be key for our regulators to also find a way to be a bit flexible with us, but at the same time, making sure that we are being held to our commitments, and also that we are managing to make sure that trust is there in the industry.
No, thanks very much, Delphine. And again, I think it's another dimension. So we've had education coming through, we've had innovation, and I think you've brought up the important concept of collaboration, not just the regulators and the industry, but inter-regulatory collaboration, but also regulatory alignment to allow for flexibility. So these are all the challenges that we have to deal with today. But now let's look 10 years into the future, because the world is changing, society is changing, and I think particularly, again, I think putting a more EMDE perspective on it, we're seeing significant societal shifts. We often hear, and I've heard this a few times, even in the earlier panel today, from a population perspective, a lot of countries around the world are dealing with aging populations. In Africa, we have a different opportunity and challenge. We have a very young population, a population where the youth is rapidly outpacing the older generation, coupled with digital innovation, coupled with, you know, we say this, I know our president says this all the time, we've got vulnerable communities in Africa, in EMDEs, that are most hard hit by the impacts of climate change, yet we are not the most responsible for climate change. So considering all of this, how do you see the role of insurance supervisors evolving over the next 2 years, and the role of the insurance sector? But before we go to that, let's see what the audience thinks. So if we can put up the next question. If you have to think 10 years into the future, what do you think the sector should be prioritizing in order to enhance its contribution to the broader societal role? Right, so we'll come back to this. Delphine, I'm coming back to you. I know we just left you, but you did have a lot that you wanted to add. So let's start off with your view. If you had to look ahead 10 years, specifically around the shifts we're seeing in EMDE countries, how do you see the role of supervisors and the sector evolving as we go forward?
And I would not differentiate the role of supervisors in the industry. I think we are, we are one. And I like to take an example from the Insurance Development Forum, which mission is essentially to optimize and extend the use of insurance and its related management capability. The feedback that they've given us is that even if we further, there's evidence that proves that countries with the greatest insurance penetration have faster economic recovery when it comes to natural disasters. And they even go further by saying that even if we increase insurance penetration by just 1%, it reduces disaster recovery burden on taxpayers by up to 22%. So we are sitting in an environment, as you said, where especially for the countries, emerging economies, where we have a very young population, we have a young population that is very technological driven, but yet we're not doing enough efforts to be able to make our products available to them. That's one thing. The second thing is this population is growing quite fast, as you say. What are we doing to make sure, and this is what we need to push, we need to make sure that we are involving them into our industry, because first, they will be the buyers of our products, but they could also be the successors of all of us sitting in this room today. So what are we doing to essentially build that, train them to make sure that they understand this better? Now, the part that becomes a bit tricky, we are in an environment, and we talked about climate change, we talk about the growing population. If we look at many of these emerging markets, food security is a challenge. Even though we have quite a large amount of arable land that is challenged also by climate change. So there needs to be a systematic view on parametric or agricultural insurance, which is still a bit new. So if we look 10 years, I would hope that at that point, we are able to essentially insure every farmer across these countries, because 30 to 70% of them, of the population of these countries are working in the agricultural sector. If we ensure the agriculture sector, then we improve food security. But at the end of the day, the one thing that I will leave us with is when people are hungry, insurance is the last thing on their minds. So it's important that we have this vision that in the next 10 years, between us, the supervisors, between the insurance industry in these markets, we are able to bring trust with the support of regulators. We're able to bring products that are easily implementable, that we are also making sure that we're bringing technology. But at the end of the day, as I said, a hungry person will not be thinking about insurance.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to stop. I'm going to repeat, a hungry person's first thought is not going to be that I need to purchase insurance. And again, it goes back to your first point, we need to educate our consumers, right? Grace, coming back to you, your thoughts on the evolving role in the next 2 years, and how do you think we should get there or can get there?
Okay, so thank you, Farzana. So I think just listening to Delphine, for me, I think is more and more supervisors actually extend their mandate to market development, financial inclusion. I actually see that we are generally going to be aligned, because it's in our interest as regulators to also see the markets that we superintend over growing. We all want vibrant markets. So it's not in our interest to stifle innovation. And I can assure you that in sub-Saharan Africa right now, thanks to FSD Africa and Senfree, I am aware of a number of jurisdictions who are actually working on regulatory sandboxes. And the reason why we're putting emphasis on this is because we want to see you testing some of these products. We want to see the industry innovating and testing the products, obviously, in a controlled environment. We still have the responsibility to protect policyholders, and so sometimes that balance is very difficult for regulators. But definitely what I want to assure you is that there is an interest to see more creativity, more innovation, but while also protecting the interests of policyholders. So I think going forward, I actually see our interests being aligned so that we can develop our markets. Most of our governments have got no fiscal space to provide social protection. So we do want to see insurance penetration levels going up. We want to see pension coverage ratios going up. And we see ourselves as catalysts. We are regulators, but we're also catalysts, for change. And so for me, I think going forward, and certainly in the jurisdiction that I'm coming from, we're doing a lot of work. There's a lot of collaboration between the regulator and the industry to bring in new products. We've just had World Bank training our market on parametric insurance because they were saying they don't understand it. But we want to see them being in that space, but they didn't understand it. So as a regulator, we took it upon ourselves to make sure that the industry is actually trained so that they can be in this space. And as you rightly say, we are an agriculture-dependent industry, economy, and it's highly important that at least we provide protection to the smallholder farmers and so on. We also promoting insurtech labs, because we want to see our insurtechs also contributing to raising the level of insurance penetration. So in the main, I'm seeing a lot of collaboration. I'm seeing a lot of collaboration between the regulators and the market to make sure that we move our markets forward.
Thanks. Grace, I want to pick up on what you said about I think we're all seeing the value of regulatory sandboxes to allow safe space for experimentation and innovation. Going back to what Delphine was saying, though, around, well, what about regulatory alignment? So alignment across different regulators. And I wonder if we're looking 10 years into the future, perhaps the next step, maybe a call of action to the IAIS, is maybe to think about, well, how do you have inter-regulatory sandboxes, so between different jurisdictions, so you're not testing in isolation, and it, I think, maybe addresses some of what Delphine was talking about. So just something to think about. Before we go back to Carmine, if we can maybe put up the results of the second poll, what does the audience think the sector needs to prioritize? We are all aligned. That's fantastic. I think alignment is the first step. So, Carmine, any thoughts on that? Do you disagree?
I agree. Can you hear me? Yes, I hope not to have problems now. No, I agree on that. And by the way, I also agree on what you have just said. By the way, I'm coming from I was a commissioner in a securities commission in Italy, in Consob. And I think that the work across, regulations and regulators and supervisors is essential, including cross, I would say, sandbox. But this is also in the nature, I would say, in the evolving nature of, broad financial markets. And I see less and less, these sectorial, insurance, banks, capital markets, and more, especially when we talk about digital, but also when we talk about, sustainability, environment. And this is one of the issues. I think we should ensure a lot of more coordination about it. And by the way, this is also what we're trying to do at the OECD. Now, I would say the world obviously, is changing rapidly. And you mentioned before, and obviously in Africa, there is maybe different experience. There are growing population in many countries, like on some side, the growing population is the old one. Luckily, there is also the young population that in other countries is growing. And so digital transformation obviously is reshaping everything, economy, society. Probably is reshaping also in 10 years' time or 5 years' time, also IAIS conference. Maybe ChatGPT probably can replace me for sure better than as a live speaker in this panel already now. But, so the insurance sector obviously, and also Grace was saying, must innovate, and regulators should be careful not to limit, this innovation. And so embrace, digital transformation also to meet the expectation of, now that you see the young population in some countries increasing, these are much better, tech-savvy younger generation than the old one, and enhance the reach of its products. So I think new technologies, and we have a lot of discussion also in our house, but again, also often with you at the IAIS, they provide an opportunity for insurers, so to seek efficiencies across, the insurance value chain. And would it be the products, product design, underwriting, pricing, distribution, and claims management, but also delivering a better value to consumers. And in the end, this is also because then we like to see also growing, industry, say solid, stable, but also with innovation. We published last year a report examining the potential role of emerging technologies and innovations in the insurance sector. And I have to say, the report highlights the important efforts to adapt and adopt to new technologies. So some companies, and many of them are there, let's say, digitalize the traditional, insurance data, such as, policy holder information and claims data, which, many companies still process manually. Other basically collect vast amounts of external data, but then analyzing it using AI and machine learning, which also can improve their ability to assess, and price risk. But insurers have also to varying degrees, developing digital products and services. So including, tools, for example, to promote health and wellness. The report, I have to say, also provides a set of potential good practices to promote an enabling environment, so supportive of these developments, while also ensuring consumer trust, which is essential. And regulators, and many of them are also in the panel, so they can introduce greater flexibility also in their approaches. And again, addressing, I think, restrictions or disincentives that could hinder the use of new data sources and also analytical techniques in underwriting and pricing. Reviewing also restrictions on the provision of risk reduction advice and services. Or also, and again, we mentioned many times already in the panel, establishing regulatory sandboxes or innovation hubs to promote innovation. And not surprisingly, if I still may, and I'm going to close, ensuring consumer trust and confidence is critical, because there is, I think, understandable concern about the use of external data, the risks of data leaks as more, external providers are employed, and also the concentration sometimes in the industry. And the scope also for discriminatory treatment. And we are working also a lot with FSB on this. So you may think in many cases positive, there is less bias, but in more, there is more. So regulators can guard against these risks. They really should reinforce the needs for insurers to maintain high standards of ethics and business conduct. Very important. Monitoring and respond to financial exclusion, which can increase actually financial protection gaps, especially for the most vulnerable, and building trust in the application of new technology. So again, sharing experiences like we're doing today and lessons is important, and that's why international organizations like IAIS and OECD may have an important role to play.
So I think it's two things. It's adopt and adapt to, and share experiences and case studies, because we can only do good by learning from each other, right? So Izak, we'll give you the last word.
Last word.
You started
Indeed.
us off, end us off.
Farzana, if one looks forward 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, a couple of things just come to mind. And by the way, I don't envy your job, because things are moving so fast for regulators.
Should I tell them, Izak, you don't make it easier, right?
Listen, Gen, the whole world of digital innovation, Gen AI, I mean, it is such a fast-moving world. It is changing organizations everywhere. It's going to change actuarial departments. It's going to change finance, HR, name it. Even in the regulatory environments, certain manual jobs that people have to do, machines will do that, which is probably a good thing, because one can then operate maybe at other levels, and it creates capacity to do other things. But yeah, it's a very fast-moving space, and yeah, from a regulatory perspective, just to keep pace, it's a challenge. And also linked to that is just the other big risk, cyber risk, a massive one that all of us always worry about. Farzana, then just, sorry to repeat a little bit what the others has also said, but just this public-private, it's such an enormous opportunity, I think, for us to do good in society. Look, what is the role of government? It's to govern, to make the rules, and through regulators. But then it is then up to the private sector, where almost the sword of supply and demand drives innovation. If you're not good with that as a private business, if you don't stay on top of your game, a competitor is perhaps gonna take you out. So I think there's enormous opportunities, regulators, to pave that way, to create those competitive environments, and then allow the private sector and almost the invisible hand of supply and demand to do its magic for good outcomes. And then maybe a final one that perhaps almost dwarf all the others is, of course, the environmental crisis. You know, it's almost an existential crisis. And yes, the sector, look, our businesses, we are not manufacturers. We don't do a lot of damage in terms of our carbon footprints. Maybe be a bit here in terms of traveling and so on and running our offices, but it's small. We don't ship atoms, we ship electrons. Okay? That's actually what we do. But we can have an enormous influence in society on this. And just to mention too, obviously by the capital that we deploy, you know, our reserves, how we invest that, enormous impact there. And then our influence in society. What are the risks that we underwrite? What are the risks that we don't underwrite? How do we influence behavior? I think there are enormous opportunities for both in the regulatory space and for companies to do good, because that is the big one.
Thanks very much. So before we close, fortunately, we have maybe a few minutes just for one or two questions. I know everyone's really eager to go and enjoy the rest of your Friday afternoon. Do we have any questions from the audience? You've convinced them. The panelists have done a wonderful job, right? So we don't have any questions. Let me just firstly just express my sincere thanks, Carmine, Delphine, Izak, Grace. Your insights, your experiences have been fantastic, and I think extremely valuable to help shape and direct the work of the IAIS going forward. I think there's some pretty strong themes. I think the overriding one is, you know, we've got a number of pressing societal issues that we need to deal with. None of these can be tackled in isolation. It requires collective action. So the overriding issue is collaboration, whether it's between public and private, whether it's between regulators, whether it's between government and regulators. I think that needs to be the overarching theme. But within this, it's the importance of education. It's the importance of creating an environment that enables and fosters innovation. Going forward, obviously, the IAIS will continue to strengthen and advance its work to ensure inclusivity. It will continue to support discussions around how to address the protection gaps. I think what for me was also very striking in this discussion is how important it is to have diverse perspectives and diverse experiences, because it's only in coming together that we can have really strong and meaningful solutions to bigger problems, like not just how insurance can support financial resilience, but how insurance can help us deal with issues like addressing the increasing inequalities in society, protecting vulnerable segments, and ensuring sustainable economic growth. Thank you all for your participation and your contributions. Thank you to the IAIS, as always, for bringing us together to have these very important discussions. Thank you to the Secretariat for helping put this panel together. Thank you to all of you for staying with us until the very end. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in beautiful Cape Town. For those of you who are staying for a few more days, we hope you continue to enjoy the country. For those leaving, safe travels. Hamba ni kahle. Tot ziens. Thank you very much.